So today, we're going to deconstruct the blueprint behind one of the most controversial and, let's be honest, ruthlessly effective transformations in modern history. We're talking about how a tiny, resource-poor island became a global economic powerhouse by running itself like a corporation. Okay, let's just dive right in. In 1965, this was the brutal assessment of Singapore's chances for survival, dead on arrival. The world basically looked at this brand new nation and said, yeah, they're not going to make it. And this image really says it all. This was the moment Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia. Its first leader, Lee Kuan Yew, actually wept on national television. I mean, can you imagine? You're leading a country with no army, no natural resources, you don't even have your own water supply. It was a nation literally born from crisis. So, when you're faced with an impossible problem, you need a radical solution. And theirs was just that. The leadership decided to run the country like a startup, with a CEO at the top and its citizens as employees, all working toward one single goal: survival and profit. And what was the management style for this national startup? Well, it was something called a benevolent dictatorship. It's a model that combines total, top-down authoritarian control with a single obsessive goal: creating prosperity for everyone. And here's the thing, their execution plan was brilliantly simple, but also brutally effective. It was basically a three-pronged attack on all the problems the nation was facing, and we're about to walk through it step by step. First things first, you gotta clean house. The most critical step was making sure the system was completely incorruptible. And this wasn't just about good governance, it was pure survival. See, to attract the foreign investment they desperately needed, Singapore had to be a rock of stability and predictability. And that meant building a foundation of absolute trust, and, just as importantly, fear. So the government declared a zero-tolerance policy for corruption. And to prove they weren't messing around, they started right at the very top. They went after their own ministers and high-ranking officials. The message was clear: nobody was untouchable. The consequences were severe. In fact, it's reported that some officials under investigation for corruption actually took their own lives rather than face the public humiliation and the punishment they knew was coming. Now, this whole unforgiving policy was enforced by the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, the CPIB. You can think of them as sharks. This agency had almost unlimited power to investigate anyone's finances, from a guy selling food on the street to a cabinet minister. It made corruption a nearly impossible crime to get away with. All right, so with the system squeaky clean, the next step was to establish absolute control. This really set the stage for something even more ambitious: engineering the behavior of the entire population to get them all pulling in the same direction. Social control came through a set of notoriously strict laws. I mean, even minor stuff like vandalism or even chewing gum could be met with severe, sometimes physical punishments like caning. The goal here was to create an orderly, disciplined society from the ground up, and fast. And this is where you get that famous phrase that really captures the wild contrast of Singapore. On the surface, it's this clean, safe, hyper-efficient paradise, a Disneyland. But right underneath that shiny veneer is a system of incredibly harsh, uncompromising laws, the death penalty part. But here's the real masterstroke of social engineering. It wasn't about punishment at all. It was about providing every single citizen with a home. The government launched one of the most ambitious public housing projects the world has ever seen. This whole strategy became known as the Golden Handcuffs. Think about it. They made sure that almost 90% of citizens owned their own government-built apartment. The state gave everyone a tangible, valuable asset, an asset that was directly tied to the stability of the state itself. The whole strategy was built on this one powerful and maybe a little cynical belief: people with a mortgage are way less likely to protest or strike or cause any kind of social unrest that could threaten the value of their home. It's a simple idea, but it's incredibly effective. So, after decades of this ruthless efficiency, we have to step back and ask, what's the final legacy of this Singapore Incorporated blueprint? What did this grand experiment actually create? Well, it really boils down to a story of trade-offs, right? On one hand, you have immense wealth, incredible safety, and social stability. But all that came at a cost: limited political freedoms, strict social controls, and what a lot of people describe as a culture of conformity. And that leaves us with a big question. Singapore really does stand as this futuristic utopia that was built on a foundation of absolute control. So when you look at the results, all the prosperity and the order, you have to wonder, Is this a blueprint for other nations to follow? Or is it a warning about the true price of creating a perfect society?